So last week was fellowship.
Jesus Christ.
This week is forgiveness and salvation.
Hello and welcome to A God We Could Believe In, a frank and honest look at Christianity as we find it today. We're going to be looking at the things the church says and does that are embarrassing, confusing, or even downright offensive. In other religious contexts, your questions might be forbidden, but not here. So whether you're a lifelong churchgoer with the scars to prove it, or you've never entered a church and are just interested in the debate, this is a safe space for you. In that spirit, we're diving headlong into questions of sex and relationships, covering topics from marriage and purity to sexuality and masturbation. We'll also be looking at issues of abuse, gender and identity, so listener discretion is advised. Please look after yourselves. For this first episode, we're setting the scene by sharing some of the lessons that we learned in church about sex and relationships and how that affected our early relationships. I'm Tim Woodson, and today I'm joined by practical theologian Simon Hall, biblical scholar Charlotte Naylor Davis, and poet, formal social worker, and daughter of Simon, Rachel Hall. So we are here in Simon's living room, auxiliary living room, to talk about sex and relationships. This is the first ever full episode of A God We Could Believe In, by the way. And we've picked a light topic for our first series, an easy one, just to kind of gently find our way. And we thought it'd be a great idea to get a kind of overview of what we all understand about Christian teaching on sex and how that might have developed through our lives. So, Rachel, what do you remember as being your earliest memory of teaching about sex within a church context?
So I was part of youth groups for a very long time, and we had the kind of classic, like, every time you take something out of a jar, like, you have less things in it, or like, you know, here's a piece of paper, if the paper gets wet, you cannot fix it. Really? Or like, the other really good one was like getting two people to stand up and hold hands, and one of those people representing what God wants for us, which is, you know, in this context, purity and you know, the other person is like worldly desires and lust and, you know, dating non-Christians. And they got these two people to hold hands and said to one of them, walk towards the door, and said to the other one, walk towards the window. And these two people kind of pulling each other, like ragging each other in different directions. And ultimately the example was that they break apart. And this example was like the bond between like you and God. And if you chase worldly things, this bond between you and God will fracture, essentially.
These are some really creative and embodied ways of instilling a sense of shame, purity.
Yeah. And you really remember them, don't you?
Yeah.
That's the thing. There's an awful lot of Christian teaching that we get that we don't remember, and yet this, I think, because it's something so close to us, you really care about it. And they work really hard to make sure that the fear goes down as deep as possible.
I think the other thing that's interesting is like when you're a child and your kind of main experiences of life are like in the home and in school, particularly if you're not in church. And I don't know so much about in our house, but when you're in school, you want to be good and you get reward for being good. And as a child in church, there is an example for you to follow of this is what it means to be good. And when you're a child, and like a lot of your pride and identity comes in like your teacher giving you a sticker if you do something right, and essentially having this idea of this like huge God that can do things like bring floods and create storms, and it gives you this idea of like, I want to behave, I want to be good because I don't want to be told off by this person. And even though, like, you know, when you're really small, you're kind of trying to grasp onto the idea of this like abstract God which you can't see and you can't touch, and you know, the idea of a father. And I think, you know, when you're a child, you think about your own father. When you do something wrong, you get told off. And I think that fear was very real for me of like, I don't want to step out of line because I don't know what's going to happen if I do something wrong.
I mean, it's interesting because I have a slightly further distance from that age. So I was probably about 20 years since I had any sort of youth group teaching on church. I don't remember anything that like physical in terms of having to, you know, act out anything in terms of a purity thing, but maybe I've just blocked it out. I don't know. I think teaching about sex in church was sort of shied away from. I think they in my youth group, and this is no shade necessarily, or maybe it is, I don't know. Well, let's work it out together.
Yeah.
But I think they were maybe a bit squeamish about it, so it wasn't. I don't remember it being talked about in any kind of major way. I do remember there was a sort of like, you would have it like once a year, and it was the like teaching session that everyone was both most looking forward to and most afraid of.
Yeah.
Because you knew you were going to get picked up on the behaviours that you shouldn't be doing, like you're saying, the kind of. But what you were really hoping for was someone was going to turn around and say, actually, it's all okay, just get on, just do whatever, it's fine. Explore yourselves sexually in whatever way feels right, because that's the good and honest way and the God-fearing way of doing it. And unfortunately, that was never communicated.
But I think what's interesting is you're talking about your experience of like having this teaching, even with an understanding of like, I'm a man, the males around me know what masturbation is, probably partake in masturbation, whereas a young woman, you don't know what masturbation is. None of your friends talk about it.
No.
It's not even a given that happens. So at least you're going into those sessions with like some like understanding of desire, just on a base level. And church teaching for me was like entirely at odds with like secular media. And like I remember watching like a Katy Perry music video, and she's like in her underwear, and I'm like, what is this? What is this? I don't understand what this is.
Interesting.
As a concept.
Yeah.
So even if you're going in and being like, God, I really want someone to tell me that it's okay to masturbate. We're starting from an entirely left field of like, my body is feeling these things, and like my body wants to respond to this feeling, but I don't know what it is. I don't have a name for it. Nobody at school is talking to me about this. I don't know if anybody else is doing this. So I don't even have a want of somebody saying that's okay, because no one's even told me that that's normal. Whereas I think with boys in youth club, it's like, so you will feel lust and you will feel desire, and that is sinful, but that's just kind of what men do, and like it's kind of like a given that you're allowed to be told off for feeling the desire. Whereas, like, no one's even acknowledging female desire in the first place.
Yeah. So I'm now 47, so it was the 90s when I was involved in church as a teenager. And I mean, like, I don't think anybody ever mentioned women's bodies and women's desire at all. So my church didn't really talk about sex particularly. Like, it's like a little Methodist church in a village somewhere. And how do you even do that as the person who just happens to run junior church on a Sunday morning? But we did go to Spring Harvest, and he's a great person now, but it was the Steve Chalk sex talk that I was exposed to.
Don't touch what you haven't
Don't touch
got.
what you haven't got, and always keep space nipples between. Exactly.
That's
and I remember the thing for us. The thing for us was like, how far is too far was the big question. And what you were really looking for was someone to tell you clearly what you could and couldn't do. And partly because, like you said, of that fear of like, if I get this wrong, I feel like I'm the worst person in the world. Like, getting this wrong has been given so much weight that I really, of course, we all constantly talked about how far too far is too far, and I think it was always cast as though it was teenagers trying to get away with sexual behaviour, and that's why they asked. But I think part of it was, it's really hard, particularly in the 90s. I had no language of consent at all. So if I'm getting off with somebody, and I want to know what the line is that I'm meant to draw. What I really probably was looking for, actually, was someone to give me something that I could say, like, no, I can't do this. But nobody talked about my body, about what sexual activity really was like. So it was just kind of masturbation, sex, touching genitals, and no one had ever even tried at that point to touch my genitals, so I didn't know what that was. So what you're looking for is someone to go, and particularly I think as women, again, like, it would have been great to have something that I could lay out there that would have been a real clear line. This is consent. I consent to this and I don't consent to this. But there was no language of that. It was about what you could and couldn't do, and the punishment, the badness, the awfulness that you would pull down on yourself if you crossed that line. And
I think when you were a teenager, I was a youth leader, and I remember around that time, probably late 90s, receiving a magazine in the post from one of the big Christian festivals, And the wife of the main leader of this festival had written an article, and I still remember it because I think I might have even shed a little tear. At the time, probably more on behalf of men than on women, because this article was about the wife's duty to have sex with her husband. And she said, well, personally, I would rather have a cup of tea myself. And I thought, like, are you really sure you want to put this in black and white and put it out into the public sphere? I'm not sure your husband would want everyone to know that. But it reflected an idea, a very overwhelming idea in the church, which feels like it's from centuries ago, that sex is something that men do to women.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And the male sexual desire is like this rampaging lion ready to devour the man. And I mean, it's not always been the case in history. Women's sexuality comes and goes.
Yeah.
They're either this passive recipient or they're this evil harlot.
Yeah.
But certainly the discourse for me as a young man was that I have this beast, and somehow, like, the great challenge for me as a man is to tame this beast. But nothing really did I pick up about a woman as a sexual person.
No. And I don't think that's too far away from what was happening in culture at the time. So I would say, like, you know, if you look at 80s and 90s rom-coms, men are pursuers and women's jobs is to resist even though they want it until they give in. You know, that's all of the films of my childhood is women resisting, and our job is to protect our sexuality, protect our virginity. It's just it had double the punishment in kind of Christian culture. But yeah, it wasn't that far off, I think, from what was happening in that discourse. But the church adds that layer, doesn't it, of like, and you'll be damaged. I think the language of damage was still around in a way that now we'd think of that being so archaic, that a woman is sort of damaged, although it's coming back, isn't it, with the manosphere and body count conversations. And,
I think it's still there.
You know.
Yeah, because I mean, that's such a good point, Charlotte, about that being the cultural narrative. Because for men, you learn from culture that women will resist you, and your job is to break them down until they acquiesce.
Yeah.
What the hell? Like, what is that? Like, how are you supposed to function from that? And I think church did nothing to challenge that.
No.
And church, if anything, encouraged it, because you're supposed to date within a small pool of people who already believe what you do.
Yeah.
For a Christian woman, in a sense, it's your job not just to protect your own purity, but the purity of the man. He can't control himself.
Yeah, that's right.
He's out of control. If you have sex with him, it's somehow your fault because you didn't resist him.
Yeah.
Also, I think, like, as a caveat, like, the language that we're using of, like, male sexuality, like, being beastly, being uncontrollable, like, that fear of male desire was instilled really early on, of, like, that sounds kind of terrifying. Like, I don't want to be worn down until I give in. Like, I don't want to engage in sex with any person that can't be controlled. And I know that now as an adult, but like as a teenager, especially when the teachings in church are like talking about male lust as this, you can't cage this thing, that gives women a very early understanding of like, that's something that I might be afraid of, rather than like, that's something that I would like to know more about or understand, or like I would like to have questions that I could ask the person that I might be having sex with about what their experience of sexual desire is, rather than just going, oh, well, all male sexual desire is the same and it looks like this thing and they're not in control of it, so therefore how can I ask them to control it if it's completely taking over them? Like it takes away the feeling of you're allowed to start and then say, I would like to stop. Like, you know, the person that you're doing that with is not, hopefully, ideally, going to be like so overcome with lust that they can't stop. Like, that's a terrifying idea. And I think to give that idea to young men and to young women of male desire as being this thing that neither of them are in control of is actually really dangerous.
I think you're right. I think there's also a language of like, once you've passed this thing, you can never go back, was the kind of narrative, right? Like it's an escalating thing. So all of those examples of, you know, like you said, the pieces of paper and all of that stuff is like, the idea was to instill in us, and I'm sure I did some of those classes. My past is being a youth worker for people like Youth for Christ, and I was mainly the person who was sent into places to talk about sex and drugs and rock and roll. That was my kind of thing, because I wasn't afraid and embarrassed by them, but I'm sure I've said some stuff that I now would be like, this is dreadful, can't believe I taught people that. But I think there was that idea of like, this is a point that once you've passed it, you can't ever go back. And the problem with that, again, is it doesn't empower you to have any actual control over your own sexuality and your own desire, because it's like, it's not true. Do you know what? You can have sex with someone, and then the next time they want to have sex with you, you can say no. But it was like, no, well, you've gone there now. Like, you've gone there now, so you may as well. And again, I think it did do that. I think there were friends of mine who were like, well, I've broken that barrier now, so I may as well just have sex all the time. When they may not have wanted to. Because they were young women in their teens, you know, in the 90s. And so, but once they've done that, well, that's it. You know, there's no going back. There's no, and again, it doesn't have that kind of ebb and flow of like, oh, actually.
Obviously, this isn't a new thing. Anyone that's read Test of the D'Urbervilles will
obviously
know that the hypocrisy around men and women's sexual activity runs very deep.
Because Simon, you didn't grow up in church. You're the one person here who didn't grow up in church. So I'm just interested to know, how was your experience different?
So I'm the oldest here. So my childhood was in the 70s and my teenage years were in the 80s. And so I remember Carry On movies and being very interested in Barbara Windsor's top flying off in Carry On Camping.
Bastions of feminism.
Such innocence, to be honest, isn't it? Like, compared to what teenagers are looking at now. Barbara Windsor's bikini flying off. It's adorable.
And then, so there was never a sex talk, but there was a lot of sex going on without going into too much detail, because some people are still alive. There was definitely person X, person Y broke up, and Y was having an affair with person Z, and then Z's spouse, they were actually having an affair with someone else, and all these couples were kind of on this merry-go-round.
These are the adults in
These
your
are
life.
my parents' generation.
Yeah.
It was very exciting, and I went to parties and got off with people from my parents' generation, which is kind of weird now, but it was the 70s and 80s, and hey. And at 14, I got a girlfriend Well done. That was the language at the time.
Yes, yeah.
I've got a girlfriend. It was a prestige thing. She was a couple of years older than me. We had sex, and it was very intense. I was very emotionally involved. It wasn't just a physical thing. I'm a very sort of falling in love kind of person, and that was the side of it, in a sense, that I wasn't able to control, the level of attachment to another person. So when I did become a Christian when I was 15, I kind of, without really having to be told, felt like this is something that I just want to put to one side. The only sex ed I had at home was that my mum would leave copies of Cosmopolitan outside my bedroom door. So I actually knew a lot more about the female orgasm than I did the male orgasm.
Well done.
Yeah, I love that for her. She's providing for your future partners.
So I'm in a funny position because I kind of felt this power, for me, almost more an emotional power than a purely sort of physical one. I also saw all of these relationships breaking down, remaking, breaking down again. It didn't seem like something I aspired to. My parents were both Tories as well, of that sort of Thatcherite era, and I was struggling with just their whole value system and feeling that there was something better. So when I became a Christian, there was very much a sense of, I'm looking for a whole new value system. And for me at that time, celibacy was absolutely fine for me, because it just felt like I didn't feel that being sexually active was good for me at that age. It's a different story.
That's really interesting.
So from 15 till 19, I didn't actually have a partner. It's not the case that I didn't try, but I wasn't heartbroken about that.
Yeah. My parents aren't Christian. I became a Christian when I was in my teens, and I made a decision to stay a virgin way before anyone ever wanted to have sex with me. I mean, like, no one even wanted to date me at high school. So I was able to hold this kind of like really weirdly proud identity of like, this is something I was choosing, but actually like nobody wanted to. It wasn't a thing. It wasn't until I was sort of 17, 18. But it's odd, isn't it? Because it did become a very important part of like how I'm different to the world, I guess.
Yeah.
And when I was getting married, my mum did have a conversation. My parents are married and have been married a very long time. Kind of not like your parents' situation at all. But my mum did ask me, like, did I not want to have sex with my husband first? Like, was this not too much of a risk? Was there going to be a problem of... I don't think she was worried about compatibility in the sense of, like, sexual compatibility, but just, like, don't you want to know before you take this massive step? And I was very like, no, because... you know I love him, and this is very important to us, and it's very important to how marriage is done as Christians. But it's odd because it was that kind of like, this is how I'm different than the world. Like it was set up very much in my head as that kind of like, this is how you show that you're not like everything out there.
Yeah, and that's really interesting. I mean, it's really interesting, Simon, so that the sort of purity culture that we've talked about here was almost a bit of an antidote to the slightly chaotic approach to sex that you experienced. And it is very much, like you say, Charlotte, it was a way of marking out being different. That was very much how it was sold to us as kids, was like, this is how you show the world that you are different.
I think it's probably worth saying that at that time, and this was true for me and Anna, that you didn't have to wait that long.
Yeah.
The youth leaders, they didn't talk about sex so much. They said the best way for you to meet a good partner is to get to know lots and lots of people. So don't have exclusive relationships now. Have lots of friends. Work out the kind of people that you like. And then you'll know when you meet someone that you really, really like, rather than just the first person that will kiss you. Yeah. And then get married, in your early 20s. And that's kind of what happened.
Well, that sounds like quite good advice.
Yeah.
They were really good people. But obviously, even in those 30 years, the culture of when people get married has changed quite significantly.
Yeah, because then when you fuse that idea with, but also if you have sex once, then that's it. Then with that person, then you are like, like to go back to the visceral illustrations from Rachel's childhood, then you are like bonded for life, and that it lives a kind of uncleanable sort of stain on your record, as it were. When you marry those two things together, that's a really damaging way of looking at it. And I think I first had sex at 17 with a girlfriend who was outside of she wasn't in my sort of youth group. I'd met her from a completely different world. She was Catholic, if that's worth anything, in this conversation. But so we both had a religious upbringing, but I'd known that she'd had sex before, and so I think I probably tried to initiate it. I don't think I had the tools to process what that meant to me, that she had had sex before, and so I think I just wanted to because I wanted to be equal with that previous relationship. I wanted to have our relationship. So we had sex quite early in our relationship, and much earlier than we were ready for. And I think I spent the rest of our relationship trying to reconcile that I'd done that. Trying to treat the relationship as if it's like, well, we can't go back from that now, so we must make this work. This must work.
Yeah.
And so that governed the way I operated, the way I processed everything else that happened in that relationship, and put far too much pressure on it way earlier than it needed to be. I think I also recognised that experience, Simon, you're saying, of having a really intense first relationship with somebody, and that it, through sex, like I felt that sort of bond. But it was almost like when that relationship ended, I was really distraught. I was completely distraught because I'd lost this relationship that meant everything to me, and I'd lost somehow in the process of trying to reconcile the way I'd behaved. I'd lost the worldview, basically, and I felt unmoored, I felt depressed, and it was only after a bit of counselling and I realised that how much the weight of losing that faith had been that I made a decision to get back into church. And so that was the sort of fix, is inverted commas. And I think if I'd been able to hold it much more lightly, either I'd have been able to let go more freely, or perhaps I'd have been able to make decisions that would have been healthier for the relationship. So, but I'm interested. What was your first? I guess, how did church teaching affect your early relationships?
I mean, yeah, I feel like I'm thinking a lot of things. So what you were saying, Tim, about this kind of first intense relationship is the relationship that I am currently still in, technically. So I had kind of boyfriends at school, but like I remember asking Dad if I was allowed a boyfriend, and he told me that I wasn't allowed a boyfriend until I was 16. And then I got...
Did I?
Yes, you did. Yes, you did. Yes, you did. And then I remember...
To go back in time and talk to this man.
I remember getting a boyfriend in like year 8, but it was one of those things where like, we don't talk to each other, we don't hold hands.
Yeah.
Like everyone just knows we're together, but it's not a real relationship.
I'm not sure if we've mentioned yet that Simon is Rachel's father. So
Oh yeah, okay, yeah.
but if anyone's missing that crucial piece of context,
That's
there you go.
Oh boy.
Yeah, so I think
There's going to be so much bad news, isn't there, really?
There isn't. So I'm thinking about, like, my experience of sex was, like, very, very small until I started going to, like, the movies with my friends and, like, saw a sex scene on a screen for the first time and was like, oh my goodness. And I think my intrigue in that was kind of amplified because it wasn't talked about in any other area of my life. And I think, on the one hand, I feel like celibacy in school sort of kept me safe from the boys, as it were. Because I was like, well, you all know I'm a Christian. And like, it was well known that my dad was a minister. Like, I was a very kind of out Christian at school. So I kind of very much felt like, well, the boys are not going to be coming for me because they know that, like, my foot's been put down, essentially.
Do you know what? Sorry, I remember, actually, this is just triggered a memory for me of there was a girl that I was very much interested in high school who knew I was a Christian, and I think I was pursuing her for quite a while, and she was I feel like I got quite mixed signals, but I think one of the things I remember her saying was along the lines of, I think she basically something to the effect of, you're a Christian, I don't want to wait to have sex. But what's funny to me now is that I'm like, if you had known how easily that would slip, we would have no problem. Anyway, that's a sidebar. Carry on, Rachel.
Yeah, so I think I felt quite, like, protected, even though I wasn't, entirely at peace with this idea of celibacy, particularly as I got older and, started masturbating, like, my interest in sex deepened. I still felt like, God, I don't really want to kiss any of these boys. So I felt like celibacy was serving me in that way, but alongside that, I was kissing girls and felt that, like, female bodies were much safer, and also because the way that the church talks about sex is so heteronormative, I was like, well, if I kiss a girl and touch a girl's body, that doesn't count. So, like, there were these two competing things going on, and I didn't talk about me kissing girls to anybody. Like, some of my friends will find out now as I'm saying this, and I didn't speak to mum and dad about the potential of me being bisexual till last year.
Yeah.
So, like, coming to terms with, like, that was something I engaged in, and there was something about, what we talked about earlier of, like, male lust is scary, and there was something about engaging in bodies that were very similar to mine that felt much safer, and because it's not included in the sex talks in church because nobody wants to admit that boys can fancy boys and girls can fancy girls, I was like, this is safe. I'm allowed to do this. So that was all going on at the same time. And when I got with my now partner, I was like, we're not having sex. Like, and even though I'd had the sexual past I'd had, I was still like, this is what I've been told my entire life. I'd not had full penetrative sex, obviously, at that point. And I was like, I'm not engaging in that. We're not doing it. Like, put my foot down. I grew up in a, like, asking Dad about, like, can I have a purity ring? Like, I was very, very attached to this idea of doing the right thing and being a good Christian. And, like, there's many levels of that, of, like, fear of retribution, fear of hell, whatever. Like, I was like, I'm going to do this the right way. And also because I had a friendship group that was Christian at school that were saying the same thing. And as we got older, friends around me did choose to do that. They didn't have sex until they got married. And I've spoken previously about my, like, fear for them. And that's not necessarily fear, but, like, you're going to have sex with this person after you've married them for the first time. What do you know about your own body? What do you know about your own wants and needs? Like, can you verbalise that to your husband? So I was very firm on, like, we're not doing this. And then after, like, 9 months, we had a conversation of, like, is this serving us still? Because obviously the purpose of sex is, like, intimacy, and we've talked about bonding, and, you know, the example that you shared, Dad, of, like, being in that house. And I love my grandparents very much, but I feel angry towards them because, like, you know, my working history is as a child protection social worker. If a teenager had said to me that they were exposed to, like, a quarter, and I'm, you know, assuming, but of what Dad was exposed to be a child engaging in whatever way you were engaging with adults that were your parents' age, it's, like, wildly unsafe. Could you consent to that? Were you doing that because that was normal in your house? Like, that's really concerning. And I'm not just saying that because you're my dad. If a teenager had said any of those things to me as a social worker, I'd be really, really alarmed. So I think we need to be able to talk about the way that sex can be used to manipulate and control and to harm. So when I started talking to my partner about, like, this is actually hurting our relationship, not doing this, because we are feeling this desire, we're, like, dampening our own desire, and we're feeling shame about the desire, and as consequently, like, love that we feel for each other, we're not actually allowing ourselves to express that. Why? And that was when I started to deconstruct and go, well, why am I feeling ashamed that I fancy my boyfriend? At, like, 18 years old, like, I fancy my boyfriend. God, what a terrible thing. Like, you know, to be physically attracted. And for me, there was layers of, like, you know, I'm a disabled person, so, like, for another person to feel, like, physically attracted to me was a huge deal, because I'd grown up in, like, secular society, not having a conventionally attractive female body. And, you know, that's irreparable. My body will never look like traditional, like, sexy, attractive female bodies because it's disabled. That is just true. And it was incredibly life affirming for me to have a partner that finds my disabled body attractive. And I wasn't allowing myself to engage in any of that because I was like, this is the thing that I've held on to for my whole, like, as long as I can remember, I've told myself that I'm not going to have sex until I get married. And also, because Dad's in the room, there's the other layer of, I'm a pastor's daughter, my boyfriend went to my church, my boyfriend's parents went to my church. Like, you know, and I don't think our family subscribes to, like, the pastor's family image very much. No. But, you know, there was a thing of, like, I don't want my parents to find out. And they didn't find out. They didn't find out for a long time. And they probably knew, but I didn't ever say directly, by the way, because there's that level of, like, I just assumed that Dad thought what the church thought. And, you know, doing this is the first time that we're properly talking about it.
The things that you're saying are so interesting about how you started to reflect on your own kind of process of, is this good for me? The fact that you had that language, I find incredible. Like, I just find it incredible. I don't think I really knew how to do any of that reflection until I was well into my marriage, to be honest. And I think it's quite brave of you, actually, to do that reflection and go, actually, maybe this is good for me, not necessarily bad for me. My first relationship was with, all my friends have been non-Christian most of my life. I don't have, like, having lots of Christian friends was not a thing when I was growing up. So my first boyfriend wasn't Christian, but before we ever even kissed, everybody knew that I was Christian and not going to have sex. Like, that was like, again, because it was this thing that you were encouraged to hold out as, like, the good virgin image. Like, that's how you know you're a really good Christian. So that was a weird topic of conversation for my friends, where we didn't talk about anybody else's sex life. We did talk about mine and my boyfriends, because they found it funny. They found it funny to rib him about the fact that we weren't having sex, to say to me that shouldn't I want to do this for him, and how mean I was. Like, it was a kind of, and it was all very lighthearted. It meant that, like, my sex life was out there, but then there were also questions about what we were doing, and we weren't just kissing. And I felt so uncomfortable with this thing that, like, I knew that we weren't just kissing, but I also knew that probably I wasn't supposed to be doing anything more than that, but we were doing more than that, but I had no language for it, and I definitely had no, like, ability to say, this is a thing I've chosen to do, so you can't laugh at me for it. Like, I've decided this is where the line is. Like, I had no empowerment to say, like, that's because this is my body and I feel comfortable with this, but not with this. It was like, because it was a morality kind of situation, not a, oh, what do I want to do with my body? It was also influenced by the fact that I was a victim of sexual violence in my teenage years from people at school. And the problem with that was I was a person who wanted to be fancied by people but wasn't really fancied by people. So I had all of that teenage, like, why does nobody like me? Then people were doing stuff to me. So I had this kind of, well, maybe I should be fine with this because you're meant to want this. Like, isn't this what you wanted? And they're not the men you wanted to do it, but they are doing it, so shouldn't. But I also had all this shame that stuff was being done to my body, and what I'd been taught, definitely at Spring Harvest, made me feel very much like if something was done to me, it was the same as me doing it. Because again, that thing of the difference between women being passive, women's bodies or female bodies being passive, and men being active, meant that I still held the guilt for violence done to me because I'd let it happen, hadn't stopped it, hadn't said anything. So then when I got into a relationship, I definitely made choices to do things with my partner I probably didn't really want to do, but I wanted to take back the choice. Which is a very common thing with people who are victims of sexual violence. You make choices to kind of reclaim your body. So I made some choices in that probably I wouldn't have done if I'd been able to express this to anybody, or if I'd had any kind of real control over my body. It was like, well, if it was done to me and it was forced on me, I'm going to choose to do it. That way it's mine. Like, that way I kind of cleanse it. The conversations I was in, and again, I don't really blame my home church for this because they're a very small church. I don't think they would have had any knowledge way to deal with this stuff. They had no training on it. But yeah, there was, like, I had no way to own my body. My body was not a thing I really owned, apart from this one rule where I wasn't going to have PIV penetrative sex. Like, there's a thing I can definitely choose not to do. Yeah. So I made these odd choices, I think, that must have been so confusing for this poor 17-year-old boy I was in a relationship with, who I was going, no, we're not having sex, but we're definitely doing this sexual thing. But also, we didn't have language to talk about it. So again, you're not going, let's have a chat about our boundaries. We're just like doing stuff at parties. and then suddenly I'll be like, no, not that though.
I think one of the things that feels like slightly ironic, and to answer about like where I got this language from. So part of it, I think, is like being a disabled child, having an entirely individual physical experience that none of the adults around me could attest to. So like going and speaking to adults in hospitals, and my mum and dad weren't in a position of saying, well, you know, when she gets up she feels like this, or like when she climbs up too many stairs she feels like this. So I had to, like, very quickly from a very young age, be able to say to professionals, when you do this to me it hurts, or like, you know, if you stretch my leg too far I feel like this, or, you know, when I do this it feels like that. So I had to get used to that very quickly. And I think because of that, I was a very, very extroverted child. We had church in the next room. There were adults around me all the time. And I think out of my siblings, I was the one child that wanted to be around all these adults, thought adults were fascinating. And the majority of that community, like, I loved, and they were people that said to me as a 7-year-old, what do you think about that? Or, you know, and it's ironic that we're talking about church taking away a lot of our voice in some things, but, you know, on the one hand, I also got very, very good at talking as a child because I was in church community that encouraged me. Obviously we weren't talking about the things we're discussing today, but it gave me an understanding of like, oh, these adults that I love and admire want to hear from me. And I think that's been, when I talk to people about my ability to communicate and be emotionally literate and to know my own mind, a lot of that goes back to being brought up in Revive and having people around me that treated me like a child in appropriate ways when they should have, but also treated me like a person in a lot of other ways of like, you know, well, what would you like to do? And a lot of that is very simple, but it was incredibly beneficial.
That's so interesting, Rachel. Simon, how do you think your viewpoint has differed from, because you've obviously been on a lifelong journey with these ideas. How do you feel like your viewpoints differ from maybe the period when you started in church and started working in churches?
So I became a Christian and found my way to a lovely, big, evangelical, charismatic Baptist church. Went away and came back, and I was the youth leader in that church. we started a church out of that was primarily young people. You've already said perhaps the most important thing is that I've been on a journey, and I think my younger self saw both what Christianity was and what being a Christian was as a very static thing. You become this thing, and you can write down what it means in terms of doctrines to believe and behaviours that are acceptable and unacceptable. It's a very, very static thing, and you're either on the right side of those lines or not. Perhaps the biggest change for me is just seeing myself now as a man in my 50s as someone who continues to grow and evolve, and hopefully grow and evolve in a good way. And so for me, the way that I think about sex now, and I think we're going to come back to this much later in the series, so, fast forward to the last episode for more on this. I think one of the things that Jesus does is move us away from an idea that goodness and badness and rightness and wrongness is about that line, about law, about rules. And if you break that law, you break that rule, then you're 100% a bad person. And if you're on the other side of the law, you're 100% a good. But I think Jesus presents something about what it means to be a human being, and can we grow into the kind of human beings that make good decisions, that help us to grow and the people around us to grow. I think my younger self was very much all about these rules. And whether I would have said it or not, the feeling that once you've crossed that line, people have said it already, something has happened that you can never come back from. Whereas now I just see, are we trying to grow into something that Christians would call Christ-likeness, or you might call, fully human? And if we are, then we're going to be able to make decisions that are to the benefit of ourselves and the people around us. So it's just a very different thing, rather than are you on one side of a line or the other. It's much more in a sense of, am I moving towards the light? Am I moving towards wholeness as a person? I know that sounds pretty hippie, but
Dad, would you want to talk about your difference of opinion from me being a child and what you thought about sex then to what you think about it now?
We're all shaped by our own childhoods. So I don't drink. So this chaotic environment that I had was, influenced by drink. So I don't ever try to say that I'm a teetotaler for religious reasons and every Christian should be a teetotaler. It's just like, I have seen harm. There's a trauma element to it, which means I just don't like being around drunk people. But there's just a sense of, I don't want to go into that space for myself. So I have to recognise that my feelings about sex are also about those experiences that I had in those formative years. So I just can't imagine me telling you can't have a boyfriend until you're 16. But I'm sure I did. I don't doubt you. Because I think what happened was that my mind went on a journey a bit quicker. What I've just said is about more of a mental journey. Whereas I think my body would have felt anxiety about your safety. And so if I'd made a rule, ironically, about when...
I mean, I broke it, but...
Yeah. You broke it.
So don't worry.
You broke it, and I knew you were breaking it, and I didn't do a lot about it, did I?
No.
So I think there's been a change in me, in that my mind is more rapid in processing stuff than my body is. So I think you were caught up in the middle of me working through stuff, because I think by the time you were in your teens, I think I'd got to a place mentally where I was dropping hints at the dinner table that we had a much more open view, particularly of LGBTQ stuff, but not just that. So maybe that rulemaking came out of more of an anxiety. But in the end, I didn't feel that you were making terrible choices. It was fine for you to break that rule. I think where I'm at now, and maybe it is because you're older and I love your partner and I think you're really good together, and I kind of think both of you are are really not just good for each other, but kind of, you're lucky, for want of a better word, to have found each other. My feeling now is ahead. I still don't, I'm still a big fan of marriage. And, at some point in this series, we'll get round to that. But my feeling is only positive about your relationship. Whereas sometime in the past, there would have been, but, they're not married, and and they're cohabiting, and now I'm like, you are coming together. You are growing. Again, it's this thing about the line as opposed to the direction of your life, and your life is moving towards togetherness and wholeness, and so why wouldn't I feel that was a beautiful thing?
I think this is all really fascinating to listen to, because I can imagine, having been a youth worker and talking to parents, that there will be parents that listen to this whole series and at the end still are like, I know, but what do I tell my teenager is allowed or not allowed? Because that anxiety from a parent of, how do I keep you safe? What do I teach you? What do I say? That, and don't do it is a really clear line, isn't it? And it's kind of easier, and obviously the conversations around sex are awkward. And my mum wanted to talk to me about sex, and my mum's great. Such good parents who were completely not worried about this, and I was like, oh God, shut up! I don't want to talk. What? I don't want to talk to you about it. I don't. They taught me very different things to the church, which probably saved me in lots of ways. There were different kind of aspects, but I think one of the things that we will do a bit with this series, but it is a thing that churches need to think about, is it is a completely different way of approaching a subject. If it's not going to be rules based, it kind of is more work. It is harder work. It is more involved. It is bigger. We're talking about a bigger theology, Now, I'm the only person in this room who has been divorced. My opinion on sex and relationships has changed massively just because it's sort of had to. When you talk about going across that line or moving towards togetherness, well, I did that and then it fell apart. And we don't talk about that very often. We don't talk about what we say to people for whom they did everything right and then they still ended up single. When I got divorced, and then people are like, are you gonna stay celibate until you find someone else? There's a little part of my brain, and this is how kind of stuck in your head stuff from when you're a teenager gets, right? There's a little part of my brain goes, well, I've broken that now. Yeah. What need is there for me to stay celibate? I did it. I did it, across the line. Yeah. And there's that sort of and then on what basis do I now make a choice? What basis do I now make a choice for my sexual activity or lack of sexual activity? Or, I'm back sort of being a teenager where I'm talking about this, but right now nobody's asking, so it's not that much of a problem. But people expect you to immediately, straight away after my divorce, know how I was going to make my next choice. And it was like, dudes, I did everything you asked. Yeah. And this thing fell apart. So now all of that's out of the window for me. I need, and obviously in that life as well, I'd already embraced lots of different theologies, and I'd done a PhD in biblical studies, and I'd talked a lot about sex and gender, and I'd become a feminist scholar. So there's a whole other journey I'd been going on around sex and relationships. But it is an odd thing of actually, you can do all of this stuff the right way, and you can end up, it can break down, and we don't really have a language for that.
I was thinking as you were talking about, I totally get that. I don't have children, but I totally get that. Somebody might get to the end of this and be like, I'm still left with a blank piece of paper and a child or a teenager with questions. And I can't speak to, I can't be the voice of the church of you should do this and you shouldn't do that. I can't do that bit. But I think, when thinking about what I wish could have been told to me, and that's not because I don't think my parents would have told me, and ironically, I genuinely don't think there's anything about me or my life that my parents don't know, except when I was a teenager in this phase of I have no idea what's going on, and I wished that I could have seen that my parents were the kind of people where I could have said, I kissed my female friend the other day, or she kissed me, whatever. I have no idea what this means. Like, we're both telling each other that it's basically just for practice for boys because we can't actually see the truth and what's going on. And I think just being able to create an environment in your house where, like, if your child asks you a question that you think is completely like, oh my God, where did you get that from? Reacting in a way that's like, okay, I didn't expect that, but this is what I think. And, you know, if your child has a question about masturbation, it can be uncomfortable to speak to children about sex. But, you know, children as young as 5, even younger, masturbate because it feels pleasurable, because it feels nice. Like, and that's uncomfortable to think about because we don't want to think about children in a sexual way, and we shouldn't. But I think it's really important to allow your children to ask those things and to let yourself hope to be the kind of parents where if your child does say, we learn about masturbation today in school, can I just ask you about that? You know, like, is this normal? And, you know, hopefully as your child gets older, just being able to say, in a safe and appropriate way, me and your dad do have sex and this is a good thing, and, you know, how does it feel to be safe? So that question of like, what shouldn't you do? Just, I think, I wish I'd had an adult to just be like, this is how it feels to be comfortable. And if your heart is racing and you're feeling nervous and you're feeling sweaty, whatever, that doesn't indicate to me that you're comfortable. And this is how it feels to be comfortable. And actually, this is the kind of person that I would love for you to do these things with. And it's lovely to hear Dad say like such wonderful, kind things about my partner. And like, had I been in a position of like when I was 16 of like, Mum, Dad, I really like this boy and they want to do X, Y, Z. That didn't happen for me, but had it happened, I would have wanted them to say, okay, how does that make you feel? Like, do you want to? If you don't, that's okay. If you are going to, like, you know, this is how we think it should feel. Because, you know, when Dad speaks about his relationship with Mum, it's using like wonderful language, and that would have been really lovely to hear, not as a child, but maybe as a teenager.
There was a moment when I was driving the 3 of you in the car, and one of you had just discovered French kissing, and you said, Dad, have you ever done it? And I said, yes. And somebody said, what, with Mum? And one of your siblings said, no, don't be stupid, with Ellie, our dog.
Adorable. I'm really going to need more of these stories as we go through the series.
Maybe I should have said, no, with your mum. I think one of your siblings has said to me, this is kind of like parenting 101 for those that are listening. One of the things that stopped them telling us stuff was that they feared that we would get upset. And so that's a lovely reason to not tell your parents something, that you care for your parents. And maybe in the past when they've reacted to things, they've reacted almost in an over-empathetic way. You tell them something bad that's happened to you and your parents are utterly distraught. And as a parent, perhaps you feel that that's the response that you should have. That bully at school's the most awful child that ever existed or whatever. But in our context, it resulted in feeling that you weren't able to talk to your parent about things because they sort of became such an emotionally fraught thing. So one thing for parents might be to just make things, it's absolutely fine to talk about this and it's not such a big deal.
So this is the thing, right? Here's the big thing I wish that I'd got from church culture teaching. I mean, I just wish they told the truth about sex. That when I had sex with my girlfriend at 17 and the roof didn't cave in,
absolutely,
and it was fine. And instead of going, obviously I processed this all on my own using the tools I had available. But if someone had said to me, well, it's fine. I mean, you are at early stages in a relationship. That's when sex happens. But it most often happens early on, and it's a bonding thing. And instead of saying you should be or shouldn't be having this thing, you should be saying how you should have it. It's like, here's what good sex looks like. Here's what bad sex. Here's when sex goes bad, and it does go bad, and it goes bad often, and you have to be careful about that. But it also goes well, and it also serves an important purpose in a relationship. And instead of being honest about that, we just created a chasm where the information should have been. And I think it's like, for parents, I remember the attempts that my parents did to talk about sex. Usually they came to me far later than I knew, more than I needed to know at that point. So when they came to me to try and have the conversations, I shut it down quick. I think that the key thing for parents really is like create a space where sex it's okay to talk about it, where it's okay, it's because it's a normal part of human existence, and you don't need to be weird about it. You don't need to put rules on it. You just need to be listening, validating, and ready to share wisdom that you will have built up over years about it, like with anything else. But at the moment we start imposing rules or ideologies onto it,
I think one of the problems is this, I'm sure we're going to come back to this probably over and over again, is this binary that all sex outside marriage is bad.
Yeah.
Which, if you've had sex outside marriage, well, it might be morally bad, but it can be quite a lot of fun, actually.
Yep.
But then the other side of it, all sex inside marriage is automatically good, which means married people can't talk about sex either.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Either between themselves as a couple, or it's not that we don't just talk to young people about sex. People who are meant to be having sex, which is this good and pure and holy and, divine sex, are often not. But we can't talk about that either. So this weird binary of that's all bad and that's all brilliant, and, until very recently, consent or no consent, it actually silences everyone from talking about the reality of what's going on.
I think that's a really important thing. I know we will get to it in the various weeks that we've got and stuff, but that kind of the fake romance of the married sexual experience being very disempowering, particularly again for women who maybe, or people who are raised female who've been told that they need to submit to certain behaviours and they need to just be okay and just get on with it, and so aren't able to say, this isn't good for me, this isn't fun for me, I'm not enjoying this, and also not able to ask for help, right? Like the other and then the pressure again, I'm sure from the other side, that men are meant to know what to do, know how to do it well. It's their fault if it's going wrong, like all of those things. And where do you go and ask for help in a Christian setting? And then if you do want to talk about it in a Christian setting, so when I was going through my divorce and I needed to go to therapy, it was really hard to find a therapist, because I needed a therapist who didn't discount my Christianity and my faith, and because that was an important thing for me to process, and I did need to talk about it, and I didn't want someone to discount it and say, well, that was a stupid decision, why did you wait till you were married to have sex, or what, I didn't need that judgment. But I also didn't want a Christian therapist who was too Christian, who was gonna add more shame when I was trying to process all of those things. So that's that thing, isn't it, of we've created this space, I think, that's really difficult, because the secular world sees us as being a little bit naive and stupid, and the Christian world has all this shame in it. So then when you do need help or therapy or relationship counselling, or how do you have that? We've got to find a different way to talk about it. That has, like you were saying, Tim, creates these spaces that are different and have less shame involved, and take away some of that just judgment stuff that makes you feel so I can't even really say this. I don't know how to say it, because if I say it to the wrong person, it's gonna make God look stupid, or make me the church looks,
Well, thank you all for sharing about that, and I look forward to going over this in excruciating detail over a period of hours and hours and hours. Thank you so much for listening. If you've enjoyed this, then make sure you subscribe wherever you get your podcasts so you don't miss an episode. Episodes are released every other Monday, and over the next few, we'll be examining church teaching even more closely. We'll be looking at what the Bible actually says about marriage, and taking a look through history to see how marriage has developed into what it is today. If you'd like to support the project, make sure you share it with friends, family, pets, etc., and you can patronise us, the good kind, by subscribing to agodwecouldbelievin.substack.com. Here you'll receive bonus episodes and regular reflections from Simon and the team right to your inbox. You can also message us with questions at agodwecouldbelievin@gmail.com or via our socials. Our first Q&A episode on bad sex and the church is on Monday 13th of October, so make sure you get any questions to us by Friday 3rd of October to have your say on anything we've talked about so far. We'll see you again very soon.